I will get a new one. It's none of that.
No. It's 12 hours off. That's why I was confused. It says 22, but that's okay. Don't worry.
I tried to reset.
Okay, no problem. Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning, everyone. So thank you for joining us again this morning. Yeah. Thank you for joining us for our continued discussion of Shantidev's text, Bodhisattva's Way of Life, the 5th chapter. Let's begin with some preliminary prayers. So on page 34. So take a moment to generate a strong motivation. We put aside whatever worldly activities we've been doing this morning, all the hustle and bustle of the weekend, all the holidays and celebrations happening in South India. Whatever is going on, we put that aside and we've joined together this morning to dedicate ourselves to studying the Dharma, teachings of the Buddha, to learn how to put those teachings into practice, how to make our lives more meaningful and fulfilled by living a life of virtue and a life of service to others. And so we've come here today to study and discuss Shantideva's text for that purpose alone, so that we might be of more benefit to other beings. And so take a moment to strongly set this intention. I'm not here for myself alone, for my own happiness, my own comfort. I'm here so that I might develop the techniques and methods and wisdom that allow me to be of more benefit to others. And so we'll recite the refuge and bodhicitta prayer once in Tibetan and then 3 times in English, and then 4 immeasurables and the 7-limb prayer in English. Sangye Shudan Soki Chonam La Chankyu Baru Dagni Kapsu Shi Dagi Jinsogi Pe Sonam Gi Droga Pinter Sangye Drupar Shok. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Reverently, I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since the beginning of this time, and I rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. And we'll continue with the prayer to Shakyamuni Buddha on page 73. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, to the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings. To you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. When a supreme amongst humans, you were born on this earth, he paced out 7 strides and then said, I am supreme in this world. To you who are wise then, I prostrate. With pure bodies, form supremely pure, wisdom ocean like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner of the best, Lord, to you I prostrate. With the supreme signs, face like the spotless moon, color like gold, to you I prostrate. Just free like you, the 3 worlds are not, incomparably wise one, to you I prostrate. The Savior having great compassion, the Founder having all understanding, the field of merit with qualities like a vast ocean, to you, the one gone to thusness, I prostrate. The purity that frees one from attachment, the virtue that frees one from the lower realms, the one path, the sublime pure reality, to the Dharma that pacifies, I prostrate. Those who are liberated and who also show the path to liberation, the holy field qualified with realizations, who are devoted to the moral precepts, to you, the sublime community intending virtues, I prostrate. Homage to the Supreme Buddha, homage to the Dharma refuge, homage to the great Sangha, to all 3 ever devout homage. To all worthy of respect, bound with bodies as many as all realms, atoms, and all aspects, with supreme faith I pay homage. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions. Perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a visual aberration, a flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew or a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see conditioned things as such. Through these merits may sentient beings attain the rank of all seeing, subdue the foe of faults, and be delivered from samsara's ocean, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. What do you think the benefit of reciting prayers before every class is? Like, why do we do it?
Calm your mind center.
Okay.
Get out the distraction.
So that's one reason, is to help bring us the space, right? So we use them as an opportunity to return to where we are right now. Another reason, and that's an important reason. Actually, when I was in Boston, Suga, at the Kurikula Center, you'd have about 25 minutes of prayers before every class, and then about 20 minutes of prayers at the end. So it would be quite more extensive, the prayers that were offered, as very traditional kind of Tibetan way to do it, And for him, he was there for all of them. Sometimes teachers would come in like at the end of the prayers, and he would be there for all of them. And he said it's really important, because when you come to a teaching, you need to make sure your mind is open to receive the teaching. And the reason we offer prayers, one of the reasons, is to help open our minds, to make our minds more receptive to Dharma. It's kind of like if you ever dyed a piece of cloth, before you just pour the dye on, you have to soak the cloth in water first, right? So that the whole cloth is equally wet, and then you add in the dye. If you just add the dye before you wet the cloth, it'll be patchy, it won't be smooth. So in the same way, we need to prepare our minds so that we can actually receive teachings and engage in the Dharma. So that's why it's so useful to do things like prayers. We're moistening our minds and we're helping prepare them to engage in Dharma practice. And so when those different prayers that we recite, they're prayers of generating bodhicitta and refuge, of course, which are what identify us as Buddhists and as Mahayana Buddhist practitioners. And then their praises to the Buddha, reminding us where these teachings come from and how blessed we are to have the opportunity to receive them and to have the perfect human rebirth that gives us access to these teachings and to this practice. That really helps ripen our mind so that when we receive these teachings, whatever they may be, we're more actually prepared for them. We can absorb them in a meaningful way. So in your own practice at home, I really encourage you to recite prayers aloud, if possible. And you don't have to have a tune. You don't have to have a nice voice. Like those things are nice. Having a nice melody is useful because it keeps your mind attached to the prayer, right? It makes the prayers more comfortable when there's a nice tune to go with them. But you don't need one. So you don't have to feel like my voice isn't nice enough. That's okay. Just reciting the prayers, you let the holy energy of the prayers move through your body, right? When you speak, you're moving wind and air through your body and you're creating form out of your mouth. The wind and air and sound is like a form in your mouth. So you're really filling your whole body with the words of these prayers. So it really helps to settle the mind and prepare yourself. So even before meditation practice, when you sit down to meditate, even just reciting refuge and bodhicitta 3 times is very, very helpful, both for your mind and just for your practice itself. So I know sometimes people, our prayers here, at least the ones I lead, we do pretty quickly. But sometimes people say, I'm here to study a text, not to just recite prayers. This isn't a puja, But there's a reason we do both. It's important to combine them both. The whole point of studying a text like the Bodhisattvacharyavatara is not to gain intellectual understanding, right? It's to learn how we can live in the world. What Shantideva's text is especially profound in doing is teaching us what it means to live the life of a bodhisattva. And the last chapter, obviously, the chapter on wisdom, is much more complicated. But the first 8 chapters, really practical advice. Sometimes taught in metaphor, sometimes in simile, sometimes really beautiful poetry, sometimes hyperbole, but it's always really direct and wonderful advice of what it means to live in the world and how we can use these teachings to guide us in our practice. I was thinking about it this morning as I was preparing, and I was looking at the news, and if anyone saw the news this morning, there's Israel's officially declared war on Hamas, and Hamas attacked first, quote unquote. Anyway, the situation is very complicated, right?
Suicidal. Hamas, basically Palestinians are doing something suicidal.
But Hamas doesn't represent the average Palestinian. So it's a difficult situation. And the Palestinians, especially in Gaza, have been forcibly ejected from their homes and treated like second-class citizens in an apartheid state for the last, it's just getting worse and worse. Which isn't to say terrorist attacks are justified, but they're definitely understandable. It's not like out of nowhere this happened. So you look at this conflict and you don't see an easy way to resolve it. And so even in looking at the news, which is so full of turmoil, I say, okay, I'm trying to live the life of a bodhisattva. So how can I look at this suffering that's happening, this intense suffering, half the world away? And how can I take that suffering into my practice? And how can I respond in a way that's meaningful and realize that everyone involved here is suffering? The Palestinians, the Hamas, and the Israeli citizens and the Israeli government, everyone. No one is happy, everyone is suffering. And due to their ignorance, they're engaging in behaviors that they think will bring them happiness, that's causing undeniable suffering, right? For innocent civilians as well. And so I tried to think of what would I do as a bodhisattva? How could I respond to this? And so even just going through the day's news, it's important to connect what we're doing in the Dharma Center to how we engage in the world, to how we experience the world around us. I was listening to who was the teaching? I don't remember where, but someone was asking, how do we actually go about bringing the teachings into practice? And I think it might have been Thich Nhat Hanh. And he said, what do you mean by practice? Like everything we do is practice, right? The idea of practice is how you live your life. That's what practice is. So to say I'm going to study teaching and then put it into practice, you say everything you do is your practice. Like every action you take is called your practice. And so you make the decision, is my practice going to be a worldly practice or a spiritual practice, right? And it's not only when I decide to meditate or when I'm actively choosing to behave this way. That's not your spiritual practice. Your practice is every moment of your life. Everything you do is practice. And so to try to infuse every moment of our life with Dharma is what it means to live a spiritual life. That doesn't mean you have to become a monk or a nun, like me, and go live in a monastery. That's not what it's saying. It's saying that you look at your life, you say, how can everything in my life be motivated by the wish to benefit other sentient beings and be guided by the teachings of the Buddha? How can that be the prime motivating factor and the prime example by which I live my life? That's what it means to practice, and everything else we're doing is working towards making that better and easier. So the reason we meditate and the reason we study is so that everything else we do in our life doesn't take as much effort. So when we experience difficulties in our life, we don't have the difficulty of having to say, what do I do now? Because we've already done the practice to calm our minds. So we have a more expansive view of things. But everything we do is practice. There's nothing that isn't practice. We just have to decide, is it worldly practice or spiritual practice? And so Shantideva is giving us a guide of how to make everything we do spiritual practice, which is why it's so beneficial. Shantideva is only famous for having composed 2 texts, and both are incredibly important texts and critical texts. And there are some scholars that even say that Shantideva's Bodhisattvacharyavatara should be considered one of the most important texts of not just Buddhism, but like across world religions, because of it's such a beautiful style, and it's so succinct, and it's so like incredibly important to the lineage of practice. That is, similar to other texts and other religious traditions, it's like a text to be preserved across religious traditions. And so we have the luxury of being the recipients of that text and the practice. So Shantideva, as you know, was somewhere around the 7th or 8th century, right? A scholar in Nalanda. And it just shows how we're so quick to judge people, right? So I'm sure you'll know the story of Shantideva. We won't go too long into it, but he was a student at Nalanda, and the other monks thought that he wasn't studying or practicing well. He basically stayed in his room. And they said, all his realizations are the realizations of eating, sleeping, and defecating. That's it. That's all he's good at. Those are his 3 activities. And so to shame him, some of the elder monks insisted he give a teaching, because they said he doesn't have any memorization. He hasn't done anything. And not only did they insist he give a teaching, they created a very high throne for him. And he elevated onto the throne, no problem. And he said, do you want something old or something new? He even said, do you want me to just recite something that I've already memorized that you all know, or do you want something new? And so they thought, we're really going to make fun of him here and teach him his place. So they said something new. And that's when he recited the Bodhisattvacharyavatara, which no one expected. It blew everyone away. And then they say, a little bit into the 9th chapter, he elevated above the throne and disappeared. And the rest of the text was recited like from a voice in the clouds. So it goes to show that I know there are people in my life, at the monastery especially, who I look at, classmates, other students, who say, what are you doing? You're not doing anything. But I have no clue their lives, right? So just even knowing the story of Shantideva is important to remind us. We have no clue the inner lives of the people around us, All we can judge is what we see. And what we see is polluted by our own afflictions, right? So we're in no place to judge others. So Shantideva himself is the prime example of never judging others from the outside. Because you never know what kind of amazing realizations they might have. So this text is divided into 2 sections. Excuse me, the text itself is divided into 4 sections, right? So if you let's go to the table of contents first. So the 4 sections, do we know what the 4 sections are? So the 4 sections, the first 3 chapters are the section on generating bodhicitta. That's the called. So those include the benefit of bodhicitta, the way of confessing negative actions, and the way to embrace bodhicitta. So those are considered the first section, which is on generating bodhicitta. And then chapters 4 through 6 are how to prevent bodhicitta from weakening or declining, right? And so here we have the chapter on conscientiousness, on guarding alertness or introspection, which is the one we're studying today, and then patience. So these 3 chapters are how to prevent the bodhicitta you have accumulated to how to prevent it from declining. And then the next 3, enthusiasm, meditation, and wisdom, are how to develop it deeper and intensify that bodhicitta. So first, how to develop it, how to prevent it from declining, and then how to increase it or intensify it. And then the last chapter is the chapter on dedication, and that's the last section. So the first 3, the middle 3, and then the last 3 chapters, and then the chapter on dedication. Generating, preventing it from diminishing, and then increasing. And since we have a very similar audience to our class last night on the Heart Sutra, if you think of the last 3 chapters are how to increase your bodhicitta, how to make it stronger. Yeah, what are the last 3 chapters? They're on perseverance, meditation, and wisdom. And so the last 2 especially are focusing on emptiness, right? How to engage in the practice of understanding emptiness. Wisdom being how to actually understand the prasangika view of emptiness. Meditation is how to deepen your experience of it. And then perseverance or enthusiasm is how to overcome obstacles to continue practicing Dharma. So the way you increase your bodhicitta is by meditating on emptiness. That just shows emptiness and bodhicitta, method and wisdom. They go together, back and forth. They feed each other, But so what we're focusing on is how to prevent our bodhicitta from becoming weak. And so generally we say that there's 6 perfections, right? And so we said that living the life of a bodhisattva is teaching us the 6 perfections. But if we look in this list here, only 4 of them are listed, right? So as title chapters. So we have, starting with chapter 6, we have patience, enthusiasm, meditation, and wisdom. Those are 4 of the 6 perfections, correct? So what are the first 2 that aren't listed? I'm sorry? Generosity and ethical discipline or morality, exactly. So they say that in this text, especially since Shantideva was a monk and he's teaching a monastic community, his discussion of generosity was especially focused on the generosity of, you're right, we said there's 3 types of generosity generally. The generosity of material things, of generosity of the protection or fearlessness, and the generosity of the Dharma, right? So he's mostly focused on the generosity of fearlessness, which is understanding the reality of the teachings, and the generosity of the Dharma. And those we say are taught in those first 3 chapters. They're not taught explicitly, but they're taught implicitly in those first 3 chapters. So that's where the first perfection is taught. And then the second perfection, the perfection of morality, is taught in chapters 4 and chapter 5. So the chapters on conscientiousness and guarding alertness. So we're doing guarding alertness. That is where the perfection of morality is. And it's interesting because usually when you study morality, the first thing in that chapter, you're talking about the different vows you take. But whether it's the vows of individual liberation or the Bodhisattva vows or the Tantra vows, those are always the first things you talk about when you study morality. And then the 10 non-virtuous actions and the 10 virtuous actions, right? But here, what Shantideva is saying is to practice morality, you have to guard your mind. That's what's most important. And all those other aspects come naturally when you're able to guard your mind. So the practice of morality isn't simply saying, I won't do these bad things. It's looking at your mind to say, how do negative actions, where do they come from? And how do I prevent them from ever coming? And it's not just saying, I won't steal, I won't lie, I won't, commit adultery. It's not just that, right? It's saying, what kind of worldly minds precipitate negative actions? And so the point of the vows is to help us live a virtuous and meaningful life, right? That's what any of the vows are. Whether it's the Bodhisattva vows, the layperson vows, the monk's vow, any of these vows. They're not vows to restrict our behavior and to stop us from doing things we want. The vows exist to show us what it means to live a meaningful and virtuous life in accordance with the teachings of the Dharma. And what Shantideva is saying is not that the vows aren't important, but he's saying in order to properly hold the vows, we just have to search our own minds. That's how we can do it. If you are always conscientious of your own mind, and you're always engaging in conscientiousness and alertness, as they're translated here, then the vows come naturally. Following the vows becomes natural behavior. So we'll continue with our study of this 5th chapter, which here is guarding alertness. also known as introspection, or introspection or meditation. Awareness, we say sometimes. So where are we? Yeah. So this chapter itself is divided, right? So this chapter has 3 sections. Chapter 5. So right now in the book, we're on page 43. So we might go back a little bit. But so chapter 5 is divided into 3 sections. The first section is the brief explanation, and that's just the first verse. And then the last section is the summary. Those are the final 2 verses. And then the middle section is called the extensive explanation. So you have the brief explanation, the extensive explanation, and the summary. And so if you just read the first verse and the last 2 verses, that's the entire chapter summarized for you, which is a good way to remember, If you want to include practice like this in your daily practice, and you don't have time, obviously, to recite this whole chapter, but you recite the first verse and the last 2 verses, that's the whole meaning of the chapter contained in those 3 verses. So you can make a daily practice of just bringing the summary into your mind. Because then, now that you've studied the whole chapter, everything that you've learned is included in those 3 verses. So that's the original breakdown, the divisions, is the brief explanation, the extensive explanation, and the summary. Then the extensive explanation is broken into sections. And the first section is describing how all harm comes from the mind. And that's verses 2 through verse 8. And then it teaches how all virtue also comes from the mind. And that's verses 9 through 17. So the point of this chapter is saying we need to be aware of our mind, and we see that it causes all of our suffering, but also all of our joy and virtue. So he's laying out how that happens in those opening verses, And the reason is he's creating the foundation. If the whole point of this is to guard your actions by watching your mind, why? Well, you have to realize that all of our suffering and harm is coming from our mind. Once you realize that, you're motivated to protect the mind. But also all of our virtue comes from our mind, so you're motivated to encourage them. So then, once you know that all harm comes from mind and all virtue comes from the mind, the next section is how to watch over the mind. So this includes using mindfulness and introspection to guard the mind. And then how to use mindfulness and introspection to train in mind training. That's the section we're on now. So that itself is subdivided. The first part being the discipline of avoiding negative actions. So that goes from verses 34 to 44. And so where we are now is in the section called How to Protect Your Precepts from Degrading or from Diminishing. And that starts on verse 45 and goes through verse 58. So I thought we'd actually start with verse 45 just to go over that quickly. And then we'll catch up. I know you went to verse 54 last time, so I won't spend a lot of time on these, but since they all go together as a section, I thought it would be useful. And so I thought we would just recite together, starting with verse 45, up through verse 58. Sorry, I have a different translation that I was using when I was preparing, so I need to try to coordinate myself across texts. Okay. So starting with 45, we can recite these together. If I happen to be present while a senseless conversation is taking place, or if I happen to see some kind of spectacular show, I shouldn't abandon attachment towards it. If for no reason I start digging in the earth, picking up the grass, or drawing patterns from the ground, then by recalling the advice of the Buddhas, I should immediately stop out of fear. Whenever I have the desire to move my body or to say something, first of all, I should examine my mind, and then with steadiness act in a proper way. Whenever there is attachment in my mind, and whenever there is the desire to be angry, I should not do anything, nor say anything, but remain like a piece of wood. Whenever I have distracted thoughts, the wish to verbally belittle others, feelings of self-importance or self-satisfaction, when I have the intention to describe the faults of others, pretension and the thoughts to deceive others, Whenever I'm eager for praise or have the desire to blame others, whenever I have the wish to speak harshly and cause disputes, at all such times I should remain like a piece of wood. Whenever I desire material gain, honor, or fame, whenever I seek attendance or a circle of friends, and when in my mind I wish to be served, at all these times I should remain like a piece of wood. Whenever I have the wish to decrease or to stop working for others, and the desire to pursue my welfare alone, if motivated by such thoughts, a wish to say something occurs, at these times I should remain like a piece of wood. Whenever I have impatience, laziness, cowardice, shamelessness, or the desire to talk nonsense, if thoughts of partiality arise at these times too, I should remain like a piece of wood. Having in this way examined their minds for disturbing conceptions and for thoughts that strive for meaningless things, the courageous bodhisattvas should hold their minds steady through the application of remedial forces. Being very resolute and faithful, steady, respectful, polite, with a sense of shame, apprehensive, and peaceful, I should strive to make others happy. I should not be disheartened by all the whims of the childish, who are in discord with one another. I should know these to arise in their minds due to disturbing conceptions, and therefore be kind towards them. In doing that, which by nature is not unwholesome, both for the sake of myself and other sentient beings, I should always hold my mind fast, acting like an apparition with no sense of self. By thinking again and again that after a long time I have won the greatest leisure, likewise I should hold my mind as utterly unshakable as the king of mountains. So, what we're studying here, what is starting in verse 48 is what are taught as the 27 sources of mistaken conduct. So if we go through this verse, there are 27 different sources of things that can cause us to misbehave that Shantideva describes for us. Now, I was trying to see if these 27 are listed anywhere outside of Shantideva, and every time I see them, I see him being referenced. And so I'm not sure if he compiled this list or if he got it from Abhidhamma or somewhere else. But they have this name, 27 sources of mistaken conduct. And if we'll go through them quickly, but what they'll remind you of is they're all found in the 8 worldly dharmas. So if we know the 8 worldly dharmas, which we've talked about before, you can see that these 27 minds are all related to the 8 worldly dharmas. And so what he's saying is this is the source of all of our mistaken activity, are these 27. Right? So starting in verse 48, the feeling, attachment in my mind to the desire or to be angry, right? So desire and anger are the first two. So these we know very easily, right? And this is like the root of the teaching, is that ignorance, desire, and hatred are the 3 poisons that cause us circling in samsara again and again. So he's identifying right away, saying, of the sources of mistaken conduct, we have to be alert for any sorts of attachment in our mind and any sorts of anger or hatred, because those are causing us to behave in ways that are discordant with reality. What desire and hatred both are minds that misunderstand the object they're perceiving. They project it to be truly existent, and they exaggerate its qualities, and then they either they create a desirous relation to the qualities that they've exaggerated as being positive, or an antagonistic relationship to those qualities they've exaggerated as being negative, right? So that's how desire and hatred work, is they exaggerate the qualities of the object due to their misunderstanding of the nature of reality. And then due to those exaggerations, they either have attraction towards it or antagonism towards it. So we have to be on guard for what we're doing now. When we engage in activities with others, we have to say, like, am I really engaging when I feel desire for something? Is it because, am I relating to the way that thing really is, or how I want it to be, how I perceive it to be? And is there a difference? Even if you think of very simple, silly things, like, if you need a new mobile phone and you look at all the phones available, and there's one that's very convenient and does everything you need, is quite affordable. But then there's the new fancy, whatever the new fancy phone is. You say, well, that's the one I really need because it can do all these things. What you're doing is projecting these ideas of value onto it that aren't really there. And maybe, I don't know, given your job, your whatever, maybe you do need a phone with all those functions, I don't know. But the first instinct is to project all these great qualities on a thing. And then you're not engaging with the thing itself, you're engaging with what you've projected onto. And that goes true whether you're engaging with the objects of desire that are like tangible objects or other people. We're projecting qualities and then interacting with our projection. We're not interacting with it. So those are the first two, and they're kind of the root of it is anger and attachment. And then in 49, we have distracted thoughts. So that's the third one. Distracted thoughts just being when my mind is running all over the place, instead of actually engaging in what I'm trying to deal with, my mind's too busy doing other things and running around like a monkey going from tree limb to tree limb. Right? So when you have that kind of mind, how can you actually engage in something in a meaningful way where your mind is so distracted? So that's the third one. And then the wish to verbally belittle others or mock others. That's the fourth. Then we have self-importance or pride and self-satisfaction or arrogance. So both pride and then the feeling that I'm better than others. Right? Anything we do that has these as the root is not going to be beneficial. And we have to find the distinction between it's useful to be proud of our work and we rejoice in virtue, right? So when you do a good job or when you're skilled at something, you can acknowledge that I'm skilled at this thing and be proud of, however, whether it's your intelligence or your activity or the good work you do. But being proud of the good work you do isn't the same thing as having this pride that defines yourself by this thing. So we can acknowledge virtue, we can acknowledge success in a meaningful way, but we're not attached to it. We say, okay, I'm good at this thing. So therefore, how can I use that to help others? Not to say, how can I define myself by this thing that everyone likes that I'm good at? So we can have a healthy type of pride. And that healthy pride can encourage us to practice more and to study more, right? So that's good. We have to find that balance between a healthy pride and a pride that we're clinging to as how we identify ourselves. And once that starts becoming, oh, I'm better than these other people, and becomes arrogance, then we know it's become poisoned, right? So we have to watch. So those are the fifth and the sixth. One, to expose others' faults, right? So that's the seventh one. Describe the faults of others. And then the eighth is wanting to, here he says pretension. That's really the wish to irritate others by reminding them of old disagreements. That's how it's often described in commentaries. Here, it's pretension. And then wanting to act deceitfully. That's the ninth one. So these are all just showing the subtle ways that our minds can influence our actions. So when you meet someone in the morning, even when you came in today and said hello, and someone said, oh, how are you? You think, well, when I'm responding, what do I want? Do I want to impress them? Do I want them to feel bad for me? Do I want them to be jealous of me? You know, what is it that I'm trying to do in this conversation? Or do I want just to be an honest reflection of my experience and to have an honest understanding of them, right? So we have to find out, why am I even engaging in this? Make sure that it's not, number 10, the beginning of verse 50, am I eager for praise? So do I say things just because I want compliments? And do I engage, not even say things, but do I go and engage in what looks like virtuous activities because I want to be complimented? Am I the first one to the Dharma Center to help set up the Christians because I want people to know that like I am one of the ones that helps do that? Or is it because I genuinely just want to help others? I have the desire to blame others, which is to say criticize them, use harsh language, cause disputes or looking for a fight. That's 11, 12, 13. At those times I should remain like a piece of wood. I really like this imagery. The way the Padmakara translated is like a log I should remain, like a log of wood I should be sure to stay. Is another way to translate it. The idea that when I see these negative minds as being the motivating factors, what should I do? At first, when we're able to develop the minds that serve as the remedial actions, we can generate the minds of their antidotes. But the first thing we should do when we notice our minds engaging in any of these worldly dharmas, first thing is to stop. You don't feed the mind, right? You just stop your behavior right away, even before you apply an antidote. So just like a log that's, sitting in the middle of a forest, just sitting there. Things may happen to it, maybe growing all sorts of fungus, may become the home for a lot of insects and bugs, but the log itself is just remaining. So in the same way, when we look at our mind and see that we're engaging in behavior that is sourced in one of these negative minds or harmful minds, worldly dharmas, the first thing we do is to stop that behavior. Okay, and then we can apply an antidote. But we need to see the behavior happening before we can apply the antidote. That's the power of introspection, right? Going on to 51. When I yearn or desire material gain, honor, and fame, that's 14, 15, and 16. When I want a circle of attendants or friends, that's 17. When I look for honor or recognition, or I want to be served, that's 18. And now moving to 52. When I'm inclined to, instead of working for others, working for myself, that's 19. And 20. Not wanting to work for others, but wanting to work for myself instead, or 19 and 20. And then when I feel the urge to speak, right? So here it's saying here he added in these brackets, actually, if motivated by such thoughts. But really, this is a separate one. So just the fact that when I feel I need to insert my voice to a conversation where I wasn't invited, why am I doing that? If I just feel this need to always be heard, to be involved, why? So you take a step back, and remain like a piece of wood. And then moving on, impatience, laziness, and cowardice, or being faint-hearted, which is to say being afraid of the practice and the teachings. Those are the next three. Arrogance or shamelessness, and then having careless speech or nonsense speech, the desire to talk nonsense, right? Those are 25 and 26. And then lastly, attachment, partiality, my own side. That's the 27th one. And so he goes on, so those are the 27. And he says, having examined in this way their minds for disturbing conceptions and for the thoughts that strive, the courageous bodhisattvas hold their minds steady through the application of remedial forces. If we don't search for the worldly dharmas and how they influence our minds, how could we ever stop living a life that's following them? And what he's reminding us here, he calls the bodhisattvas courageous. It takes courage to engage in introspection. And it takes courage and strength to practice the way of bodhisattva, to live a spiritual life. Because it's so much easier not to do. It's so much easier to give in to our whims and to give in to our predisposition to worldly activity. Because
But
that's
even some extent, small talk and talking about pleasantries and the weather and is all required, right? I mean, we should not say, I'm not going to gossip at all.
I mean, gossip is one of the 10 non-virtuous
No, I'm
actions.
talking about
Idle chat. I mean, so, they say, it is a non-virtuous action. Idle chat, gossip are all included in the same category. So the question is, why are we doing it? That's what it comes down to. So when we are in community with others, whether it be at a Dharma center, at our workplace, school, any of these places, we engage in these kind of pleasantries. So why are we doing it? Are we doing it just because we want to pass the time, because we're bored, because we're lazy, or are we doing it because we want others to like us? Or do we say, I'm part of a community, and therefore maintaining community relationships is important, and I also care about that person. I want to know what's going on in their life. I want to know how they're actually feeling and doing. So what is our motivating factor for engaging in these kind of behaviors is what it comes down to. So it's not always horrible to be engaging in these pleasantries and talks, but do I genuinely care about this other person and what they say, or I'm just passing the time? And so I say, oh yeah, how's your weekend? Oh, okay, what are you watching TV? Oh, okay, blah, blah, blah. Or do I really care, So that's a big difference. So it's not that the action, the conversation itself isn't as important as the mind that's preceding it, right? And so we have to make sure that all of our actions of body and speech are being controlled by the mind, which is what this chapter is teaching us, right? This chapter is saying we have to look at what is our motivation for any of these activities. All of our actions of body and speech are preceded by an action of mind, right? And so what is that mind? Is it a mind wishing to benefit others, or is it a mind that's pursuing one of the 8 worldly dharmas? And here, this list of 27 is just an elaboration of the 8 worldly dharmas, right? Wanting fame, wanting gain, wanting popularity, wanting pleasure, not wanting suffering, not wanting to be judged or infamous, not wanting to have any sort of loss, and not wanting to be criticized. These are all just extensions or elaborations of those 8.
And one quick question, like,
Yeah.
like you're making an ideal talk, you see someone and you wish them and you have a brief conversation. So is it the thing that you have to be aware of why you're engaging with that conversation or that person that you know already? And as long as you know your intention why you're engaging with the person in a conversation, that's important, but you cannot ignore them, right? Or you know what I mean?
Yeah. So as long as you live in society, there are expectations to follow what society dictates as being part of a useful member of society, right? And that's part of living in community. And so if you're in a community and there's someone, say, that you don't like very much, but they want to come up and talk to you, for you to just ignore them would be really rude, and it would create disharmony, right? So it's not an appropriate way to behave as part of that society. So in that case, you engage in idle talk, and you don't really want to be talking to this person anyway, but you still do because it's the appropriate and polite thing to do, right? So in that case, you still have a mind that says, okay, I don't want to offend this person, I don't want to cause them harm, and I don't want to break the social mores of this community. So that's why I'm engaging in this. But no matter what it is, if it's a friend or an enemy or a stranger who you meet on the street, as long as you're watching your mind as to why you're doing it, then it becomes beneficial. And there might be some occasions where you have no good reason and you have to just say, I can't engage in this kind of discussion right now, that this isn't useful for me, that this is wasting time, that we could be doing something else, that I could be whatever it may be. And so then you have to evaluate, maybe these conversations isn't useful. It depends on the circumstances. And in most cases, it's okay to step away. A lot of the Kadampa texts, when you look at the mind training text and the Kadampa text, they say that for someone who actually practices mind training, and someone who practices a life that's trying to abandon the 8 worldly dharmas, their actions look like those of a madman to someone who's living in the world, because they're so discordant with everyday life. Because everyday life is all about the 8 worldly dharmas. So if you're trying to actively avoid the 8 worldly dharmas, then your actions might look like that, a crazy person, And so that's just something to realize. I'm not saying we should all go do that, but it's realizing that to actually live this way and dedicate ourselves is difficult, and it's very much against the tide. It's going against the stream of what society is. So we have to find that balance. Someone like me who lives in a monastery, I have many more luxuries than those of you that have to go to work or have to engage people in a different way, because I'm allowed to behave in certain ways that you aren't, because I don't have to deal with people in the same way many of you do, I don't have a family I have to take care of. I don't have coworkers that I have to maintain healthy relationships with. I don't have a boss that I have to keep happy, So depending on your situation, you find how to apply the teachings. But as I was saying, what Shantideva was reminding us is that this type of introspection, it takes courage and it takes fearlessness, because it can be scary if you actually look at how many of our activities are done out of a worldly mind. How often all we're doing is pursuing our own pleasure, putting ourselves above others, just trying to pass the time. How often we really just want to be complimented in these things. And we're not engaging out of a pure heart, but out of a deluded heart in this way. And to really look at that can be scary. So it takes courage. So to live the life of a bodhisattva is to be a warrior, they say. They sometimes call the bodhisattva a bodhisattva warrior, right? Kao, a hero or a warrior. It takes courage, which is the same word for courage. So he's reminding us that to look at your thoughts, actually look at them, and to analyze them, it's not for the faint-hearted. To actually practice Dharma, and so one of the things they translate as cowardice, right? What he means by cowardice isn't like, I'm afraid to run into a burning building. That's not cowardice. It's I'm afraid to look at the teachings of the Buddha and apply them to my life. That's cowardice. Because I'm comfortable with my life the way it is and my worldly life the way it is. And so it's important to look at all of our actions. But an important thing to remember is we're not judging ourselves. There's no judgment here. There's not saying I'm a bad person because I behave in this way, right? As one of the hard things, especially in the West, so much of Buddhism and Buddhist teachings are very prescriptive, right? They see things as black and white. And we take that as being judgment. Because of this, therefore I'm a bad person. This isn't about judgment. I can look at my activity for the last 24 hours and say, wow, my life in the last 24 hours was filled with worldly elements. So much of what I did was seeking out fame or pleasure, trying to avoid displeasure. It doesn't make me a bad person. It doesn't mean that I am not a good monk or a good practitioner. It means that I'm a human being and I need to work on my mind. And so it's giving me the information I need to practice better. It's very easy to become judgmental of ourselves and think that I'm not good enough, I don't practice well enough, I should just give up. That's not the point. So when you're looking at your mind and you're analyzing all of these sources of mistaken conduct, important is to not judge yourself, but to be honest. Yes, I'm engaging in this because I want pleasure. Okay, what would it look like if I wasn't motivated by that? What would my behavior be if I wasn't motivated by one of these 27 minds or activities? That is important to look at. It's not about saying I'm a bad person because I do this. I don't know about you, but I know that I'm quick to judge myself. So it's important to realize we're not trying to judge. We're just trying to be honest and critically assessing our minds and our behavior. So then, once Shantideva lays out these 27 different sources of mistaken conduct, and he says that it's critical in verse 54 to actually look at them, he gives us what are called the 9 factors of producing virtue or practicing virtue. So the next verses, starting from verse 55 onward through 58 into this chapter, are saying these are the 9 different factors we can always be practicing. And so what's important is we talk about remedies, right? And so there's 2 types of remedies. There's the remedies that actively engage with harmful minds, and then there are the remedies that are always pushing us forward. So they're the remedies we apply when we see something harmful. Like, so say I see myself engaging in a mind of anger, then I can actively try to develop either patience or love as a remedy to that, right? But another type of remedy, so that's not actively working against something, is a remedy that it's called a remedy, but what it really is a mind that's always creating the ground for virtue. So here we can look at the first one here. So starting in verse 55, be very resolute and faithful, right? So that's the first one. So we can also think of that as having confidence or having certainty in our practice. That's what that means. And in the teachings, being resolute and faithful. Let me see. Yeah, okay. So when you say I have confidence in the teachings and I have confidence and faith in the teachings and in my practice of those teachings, right? That's not something you develop that mind to counteract another mind. You develop that mind to encourage you to move forward. So the remedies can either be reactive or they can be constructive. So the reactive ones are the remedies that see what's happening, the negative minds, and reacting to them to stop the negative minds. But then the constructive remedies are the ones that are laying the foundation for virtue in the future, right? So we can think of it in 2 ways. They're both called remedies, and they're both virtuous minds, but they're serving different roles. Some of them are counteracting harmful minds or worldly minds we already have, and other ones are creating the groundwork for us to have future virtue. So these 9 aren't actually remedies in the sense that they are reacting to negative minds. What they're doing is saying, how can I cultivate this garden so only virtue grows? How can I create the best conditions for virtue to grow? So these have to be combined with the reactive remedies. When you notice your mind being distracted, you react to it. But these 9 are teaching us how to create the best conditions. So we start in 55, which has, here it's translated as very resolute and faithful. So what that's talking about is, like I said, confidence or certainty in your practice and in the teachings themselves. That's the first line. And so faithful doesn't mean being blindly faithful to teachers or even to the teachings, right? There can be a teaching that you read and it's very disturbing to your mind and you don't understand it. So that doesn't mean you just have to blindly follow it. But we have confidence in the Buddha himself and the lineage of teachers that came from the Buddha. And so when there are teachings that we don't understand, instead of dismissing them out of hand, we say, okay, I don't understand this. How can I go about understanding it better and developing conviction in it? And that might be studying it, meditating on it, asking your friends, asking your Dharma brothers and sisters, asking one of the teachers, and getting commentary on it. But having conviction that all the teachings of the Buddha lead us to liberation from samsara. That's what it means to have faith. And having conviction that practicing those teachings in this life will make our life and the lives of all sentient beings more beneficial and better and happier. That's what it means to have faith. It doesn't mean to put teachers up on pedestals and say no matter what they do, they can't do anything wrong. That's not faith. It doesn't mean that I can just close my eyes to negative actions that teachers do and pretend that they're only beneficial. That's not faith. At least it's not useful faith. Maybe a type of faith, but it's a perverted faith, right? Our faith has to be based in conviction and in experience. So therefore it's grounded. So being resolute and faithful, having confidence these teachings are valid and that they lead us to liberation. Being steady, that's the next one. So what does it mean to be steady? It means we rely on our practice and we trust it. We rely on, sometimes, especially when we're beginning, I'll speak for myself. Quite often, when I'm experiencing like a very strong negative emotional reaction to something, I know like the right answer, like cognitively. I know that if I do X, Y, and Z, that's the right thing to do in this situation. But I'm so overwhelmed by my desire or my hatred or my fear or whatever it is that like I'd rather wallow in my negative minds than take the actions that I would advise to anyone else. If someone came to ask me for advice and they said, here's my situation, I'd say, oh, do X, Y, and Z. But now that it's me experiencing that, I don't want to do those things, right? Because I'm just so content to be sitting in my own filth like a pig, right? What that means is I don't have confidence in my practice. I don't have confidence in these. So that's saying I don't have this steadiness or relying on it. Even though intellectually I know that this practice will lead me out of suffering, when I'm in the middle of suffering, I'd rather just suffer than apply the remedies because I'm so used to suffering. Because I've done it for so long in life after life. It's so easy. And it takes courage to actually apply the remedies. So like one example, and I've told this here before, is that a friend of mine, I had expected him to do something for me. This was back when I was in Boston, so before I was a monk. And I had expected him to introduce me to some certain people and to like go out on a limb to help me in this certain way. I didn't ask him to do this. I just expected him to, because that's what I would have done if I was him. And he didn't do it because I never asked him to, and because that's not the way he behaves. And then when he didn't do it, I was so hurt. I was like, when you get so angry, you're just crying and you can't say anything? That's how hurt I was. And I was so mad. And I realized I'm mad because he didn't behave in a way that he didn't do anything out of the normal for him. So I wasn't mad at him, I was mad at myself for expecting something from him that I knew he would never give. And yet it was so easy and comfortable just to stay mad at him instead of saying, wait, this anger, this frustration, this grief is all from my own mind. I invented this whole situation. I projected an idea without telling him, and then he didn't live up to my projection, and now I'm disappointed. None of that came from his side. But it was so much easier just to stay unhappy than it was to say, okay, how can I get rid of this? What does it mean to remove these projections and to look at my own mind and to not be disappointed by my, the weird projections that I superimpose on the world? It was so much easier just to stay in the suffering and not have confidence that by doing this practice, it will actually lead me out of suffering. By engaging in a proper following of the teachings, I can have happiness and not be experiencing this grief. So that means I didn't have the steadfastness that I needed. And then he goes on to say that not only do we need steadfastness, here it's translated as steady, respectful, and polite. So respect and courtesy is translated also here. So respect means being resolved to actually act in a way that's in accordance with Dharma, but not being influenced by difficult circumstances. So that's what it means by being respectful here. It means even when the situation is difficult, following what is the Dharma way and not the worldly way. That's what it means to be respectful. So it may not always look like worldly respect. We have to follow a spiritual path, right? They say when you're taking vows, when you're taking your monk's vows, and they're giving you advice before you take vows, it's like, one of it is you say that I'm not just taking these vows for when I'm healthy, but not when I'm sick. And I'm not taking these vows when material conditions are good, but I'll give them up when it becomes more difficult, right? So I'm not only practicing Dharma when it's easy to practice Dharma, I'm practicing Dharma all the time. Because the truth is, when it's harder to practice Dharma, that's when it's most important. That's when the Dharma becomes our life raft and bring us out of suffering, even if our physical or external circumstances are difficult. That's the whole point of the spiritual practice. But it's the easiest time to forget about it when we have difficulty. So here, by being respectful, it's saying that when I'm in difficult circumstances, I won't disregard the teachings. And being polite or having courtesy means approaching the teaching with joy and with devotion. So it's being polite or courteous toward the teaching itself. Especially those teachings that don't say what we want to say. You know, the teachings that don't indulge our desire, our worldliness. So whenever I approach a teaching, I do it with joy in my heart and with devotion to the Buddha and to the Buddhist teachings. That's what it means to practice this quote unquote courtesy or being polite. With a sense of shame, apprehensive, and peaceful, here is what he says. So really, translations are quite different, so I'm trying to combine the two. The first one is having a sense of conscientiousness. So when you have a sense of conscientiousness that's directed toward oneself, that means we have shame and embarrassment. So we make sure we don't engage in non-reckless activities. And we have a conscientiousness that's directed at others, especially towards our teachers. We regard our teachers with a sense of awe and apprehension. And what that means is not fear, just recognizing that anyone that has the opportunity to teach us Dharma in a direct way is a gift. We don't have many of them. We're very blessed to have anyone in the world that can teach us Dharma. And we have access to so many great teachers that we're incredibly, incredibly blessed. So we just have an awe or a great respect for that. Even if they're not, our root teacher, we don't consider them a lama, but just the fact that they have the chance to teach us Dharma, we should have respect for that. So that's what he's getting at in this line. So that's the fifth one. Here it's kind of translated a little strange, a sense of shame and apprehensive and peaceful, but it really should be conscientiousness and awe is what he's talking about. Conscientiousness is directed at oneself and awe is directed at others. So that's the fifth of the 9. And then 6 is in the next verse. Oh no, I see, he translated it differently. The peaceful should go with how I work to make others happy. I should peacefully or calmly work for the happiness of others. So that means I should always try to generate a quiet and peaceful mind in all that I do. Okay. And then moving on, there's 3 more. So number 7, this is verse 56. So verse 56 is saying, sentient beings are childish in that some find one thing amusing and others find that same thing upsetting. And they're fickle, they change their mind all the time. So instead of letting myself be sucked into this kind of drama and to the back and forth fickle needs and wants of ordinary sentient beings, I will keep my mind steady and I won't be affected by that kind of back and forth. How does he translate it here? The whims of the childish. So we say all sentient beings are like children, right? And that includes ourselves, that we don't understand the nature of reality, and we act out of delusion in the same way small children do. So instead of allowing ourselves to be upset by other sentient beings, we recognize that the way they act is due to their own delusions. You know, when people are acting in a way that seems upsetting to us, they're only doing that because they're suffering and because they don't want to be suffering. So how can I be bothered by someone who is suffering? That's what we have to remember. So I try to create a mind that is never disturbed by the whims and the fickle nature of ordinary beings, as nothing is guaranteed. Some people find beneficial, other people find harmful, and they go back and forth. So I won't let my mind be disturbed by that. I'll recognize that other sentient beings are suffering and are motivated by suffering. And then I will act, here he says in verse 57, I will act in such a way that my nature is not unwholesome. So I'll act beyond reproach. And what that means is, in all of my actions of body, speech, and mind, I'll never let my actions of body, speech, and mind be in such a way that they can be reviewed by others as harmful to the Dharma. So I'll act in such a way that's beyond reproach. And it becomes difficult. You see, a lot of the vows we have as monks, especially, a lot of the vows we have, so as a fully ordained monk, I have 253 vows. And a lot of those vows are designed to not cause lay people to lose faith in the Dharma. Since as a monk, I'm a representative of the Dharma. So there's a number of vows that say when I eat food, I shouldn't make certain sounds. There's nothing wrong with making those sounds, but you have to figure, especially at the time of the Buddha, the monks who would be traveling to beg for their meals. So if you offered a meal to me and I came into your house and I'm eating like this, right? Wow, those monks are pigs, right? And you develop some sort of not a good idea of the Dharma. So I have a vow not to eat and make certain noises when I eat. I have 3 vows actually, about different noises I'm not supposed to make when I eat, right? But that's only because that action can cause someone to lose faith in the Dharma. And since I'm a representative of the Dharma, I don't want that to happen. And there are other vows, like when I walk down the road, I won't swing my arms back and forth. Same reason, it has to do with causing lay people to lose faith. If they see a monk behaving in such a way that seems discordant with what they think the Dharma should be, okay? It goes the same for everyone that's practicing. Not because you're representatives of the Dharma necessarily, in the same way that an ordained Sangha member is, but because I'm practicing a spiritual life. And so I won't behave in such a way that others can look at my behavior and judge it as being harmful. And judge it as being nefarious or deleterious. So all my actions will be above reproach. I'll always have morality guiding everything I do. And then the last of these 9, so the 9 factors of how to produce virtue, is in verse 58. And this is recognizing that we have a perfect human rebirth. Recognizing that we have an opportunity in this life to practice Dharma that's incredibly rare and incredibly valuable. And so we don't waste it. So these 9 that he lays out is not an exhaustive list, and they overlap a little. But the point of them is if we always try to practice these 9, then what we're doing is creating the ground where we're allowing virtue to ripen and grow and strengthen. And we're preventing negative minds. So by engaging in these 9, we're simultaneously making it difficult for the 27 that were discussed previous, and we're making it easier for virtue. Because the whole point of this chapter is guarding alertness, right? It's a discussion of the practice of morality. And what is the difference between alertness and mindfulness? These two are often spoken together. And then actually it might come up later. What's the discussion? And it maybe came up earlier, I'm not sure in this chapter where it is. But we often talk about mindfulness and alertness, or mindfulness and conscientiousness is sometimes translated. What's the distinction between those two?
It's like keeping yourself all the time watchful. Like, if something just happens instantaneously, then you don't react immediately. I guess that is mindfulness is more of a long-term kind of
Hmm.
thing. Be aware of your mind. That you don't.
Kind of. Mindfulness is our ability to stay focused on an object, whatever we're meditating on or whatever we're focused on. That's our mindfulness. And it's making sure, especially if we're saying just like in our meditation practice, what our mindfulness is doing, say I'm meditating on the breath, right? Mindfulness is making sure that I'm staying focused on my object of meditation, whether in this case the breath, and I'm not being distracted, especially by external stimuli. So my focus is staying on my object of meditation. That's mindfulness, it's non-forgetfulness. And in fact, the word in Tibetan we translate as mindfulness, drempa, you often translate as memory, right? Yeah, smrti, yeah. So this relationship between memory and mindfulness is very important. I'm not forgetting what it is I'm focusing on. That's mindfulness. But what introspection is introspection, as you're saying, or alertness or conscientiousness. It's all different translations of the same term. It's not only looking for these external obstacles that could cause me to lose concentration, but looking inward at what internal obstacles and problems I'm having. So making sure I don't have these desirous minds arising that are influencing how I practice. Making sure I don't have anger or jealousy or any of these harmful minds coming. So introspection is looking at our own minds and seeing what kind of obstacles are coming up from the inside, not the outside. Whereas mindfulness is focused on maintaining attention on our object of meditation and not being distracted by external. And then mindfulness and introspection is internal distraction, basically. So they talk about if the mind, I think actually he must have said in the beginning of this chapter, right? Let me see. He says, so verses 1 and 2. In this world, unsubdued and crazed elephants are incapable of causing such harms as the miseries of the deepest hell, which can be caused by the unleashed elephant of my mind. However, if the elephant of my mind is firmly bound on all sides by the rope of mindfulness, all fears will cease to exist and all virtues will come into being. Okay, so that only gives half of it. Usually what we say is, if the mind is like a crazed elephant, and there's a central post, the rope tying the elephant to that post is the mindfulness. So that's preventing the elephant from going outside of a certain parameter. And then the hook that you use to go the elephant where you want it, that's the introspection. So you need both. Now, I'm not saying we should stick elephants with hooks, but that's the analogy we have from ancient India, right? So one of them is keeping it in place. Mindfulness is keeping it in place. And then introspection is adjusting its behavior and making sure it's not acting crazy. So both of them work together, hand in hand. So if we can think of the mind as an elephant, the post and the rope it's tied to is our mindfulness, keeping it within a certain parameter, not letting it stray too far away. And then the hook that we use to encourage the behavior we want, that's the introspection that looks inward. It's often also described as like a watchman or a sentinel who's guarding the entrance to something. They're guarding the entrance to our mind. It's like a bouncer at a club, basically. So that's how you have to, so this chapter is all about that introspection. So those 27 sources of non-virtuous behavior are showing us things that we can be looking for, right? Because if you just say, well, I'm looking for attachment or anger, that's very vague, right? Even if I'm looking at the 8, I'm looking for a mind that's motivated by one of the 8 worldly dharmas, that's a little more specific. But if you say, well, here's a list of 27 different things, and this could even be expanded, right? You're getting more specific, which is letting you see more and more things to look for, right? It's not to say that you have them all the time. It's just giving you more ammunition, because you may not have realized that one of these minds was there. If you were just saying, am I motivated by attachment? No, I don't think so. Am I motivated by anger? No, I don't think so. Okay, it must be fine, right? But then you realize, oh, no, there's a small, like a desire for others to praise me that's there. And I don't really think of that the same way I think of attachment or anger. So I didn't notice it, right? But now I do because I know to be on the lookout for it. So introspection is like I said, the bouncer. And what we're doing now is, giving him all the tools he needs. So this whole section, like I said, this section is called the the discipline of avoiding negativity, and here specifically, how to protect our precepts from degeneration. Our precepts being whether they be our vows, our bodhisattva vows, the 18 root and 46 secondary bodhisattva vows, or whether they be our vows of individual liberation, or they just be the precepts, the guidelines by which we live a spiritual life, even if we haven't taken formal vows. So this is how introspection is used to prevent our virtue from diminishing. And so the next section, starting with verse 59, we move into a section called instead of the discipline of avoiding negativity, we have the discipline of gathering virtue. So just like I said in the beginning of this chapter, we first started with how recognizing that all harm comes from the mind, and then it goes how, well, virtue also comes from the mind, right? Those are the first two parts of this chapter, of the extensive explanation. So here it's parallel. The first part is saying how the discipline of avoiding negativity and the discipline of gathering virtue. So when we think of practicing morality, it's not only stopping negative behavior, but it's encouraging positive behavior. It's doing both. And so the next section is how to gather virtue. And that has two parts. And so hopefully we'll have time to finish them both today. The first one is why it is necessary to abandon our body, and then how to become skilled in the way of behaving, properly behaving. So starting with 59 is why it's necessary to abandon our body. And so Shantideva says that this mind we have that's attached to the need to protect our body is a fabrication. It's not helpful. And it comes from conflating the I with the body. Right? It comes from thinking that I am my body, and therefore anything that harms my body is harming this truly existing I that I'm clinging to. So if we could actually get rid of the mind that grasps to the truly existing I, we'd automatically have no concern. But since we can't do that, or we're working on it slowly, one of the ways is recognizing that we spent so much time and energy protecting our body, but our body is not the I, it is not the mind, it's not the way to create virtue. All it does is just a sack of meat. It's not anything else. And so he's being quite hyperbolic here, but that's what he's talking about. So we'll go through these verses and then we'll talk about them a little bit. They go from verse 59 all the way through verse let's see, 70. So we'll read those together and then we'll have a little discussion because it's a pretty contentious section. It's also really easy to understand, so it's nice. So starting with 59. If, mind, you are not made unhappy when this body is dragged and tossed about by vultures greedy for flesh, then why are you so concerned about it now? Holding this body as mine, why, mind, do you guard it so? Since you and it are separate, what use can it be to you? Why, O confused mind, do you not hold on to a clean wooden form? Just what is the point of guarding this putrid, dirt-filled machine? First of all, mentally separate the layers of skin from the flesh, and then with the scalpel of discrimination, separate the flesh from the skeletal frame. And having split open even the bones, looking right down into the marrow, while examining this, ask yourself, where is its essence? If, even when searching with such effort, you can apprehend no essence, then why, with so much attachment, are you still guarding this body? What use is this body to you? If its dirty insides are unfit for you to eat, if its blood is not fit for you to drink, and if its intestines are not fit to be sucked. At second best, it is only fit to be guarded in order to feed the vultures and the jackals. Truly, this body of a human being should only be employed in the practice of virtue. Yet instead, you guard it with attachment. Then what will you be able to do when it is stolen by the unsympathetic lord of death and given to the dogs and birds? If servants are not given clothing and so forth when they are unable to be employed, then why do you exhaust yourself looking for the flesh alone, when even though caring for the body, it goes elsewhere? Now, having paid my body its wages, I shall engage it in making my life meaningful. However, if my body is of no benefit, then I shall not give it anything. I can conceive of my body as a boat, a mere support for coming and going, and in order to benefit all others, transform it into a wish-fulfilling body. So he's being a little bit hyperbolic here, right, to get the point across. But the point is, we're so focused on our body. Think of how much energy we put into our body, you know, washing it and then keeping it clean, how many we put on either makeup or clothing, perfumes, these kind of things. How much time do we spend on our appearance? And how much time do we spend focusing on our body? And why are we doing that? Now he ends with saying, I'll think of this body as a boat. Now we talk about the importance of a perfect human rebirth, right? The body is part of that. Being born as human is the best way to practice. The best opportunity to practice Dharma is with a perfect human rebirth. So there's something important about this body. But the only import it has is that it lets us engage in a spiritual life. As soon as you give it more importance than that, then it's just attachment. It's not beneficial. So he's saying, you know, when you die and your body is fed to the vultures and the jackals, you're not upset by that. Why are you upset about your body being, you know, acted in such a way now? You know, it's because we grasp onto the body as if it were ourself. And we have strong attachment to our sense of self that we put so much care into our body. And so it's easy to read this and say, okay, I'm just going to starve myself. I don't need to do anything. And he says, no, our body is like a boat. So it needs to be maintained, right? We need to make sure that it's always seaworthy. And for different people, that'll be different, whether it's exercise, diet, nutrition. It's not neglecting our body. So he's not actually saying, I shouldn't care about my body at all. Like, just to live in a cave and not, you know, focus on myself. But it is saying that, like, I shouldn't put emphasis on my body for the sake of my body. I should realize that my body is designed, or not designed, excuse me, the role my body serves, especially in this perfect human rebirth, is to give me the opportunity to practice Dharma in a meaningful way. That's the benefit I have as a human being with a human body. And so I need to make sure my human body is working to the best of its capacity to let me do that. So if I'm incredibly unhealthy, and that means I can't prostrate, I can't do circumambulation, I can't attend Dharma teachings because I'm too unhealthy to do so, then that means we need to take better care of our body to make sure we can do those things, right? So it's not saying ignore your body. Or if I'm never going to bathe because it's not worth it, and I get so like this stuff get, you know, dirty that I get sick and I get illness and others are disgusted and reviled by me, then that's also not beneficial, right? So we have to find the balance. We need to take care of our body in such a way that we can exist in society with other people, and then we stay healthy and we can practice the Dharma. But we have to realize that's what we're doing it for. We're not doing it because I want others to see how beautiful I am. You know, I want others to see what a perfect body I have. You know, there's a big movement, at least in the West, of body positivity, and realizing that, you know, not all bodies are meant to look like European supermodels that are taught to us what beautiful looks like. And that for both men and women, biological men and women, having extra weight on you isn't necessarily the end of the world, right? And it's okay to be overweight, quote unquote overweight, because a body mass index isn't the most important thing. What's most important is that your body's healthy. So if you have all of your blood pressure and your hypertension and all these things are all under control, then it's okay not to have a body that would go on the cover of a magazine, right? But what you're doing is making sure your body is healthy and it's letting you do the things you need it to do. And that's the amount of attention you need to give it. And when you're giving it more attention than that, it's just attachment. And we can realize this is coming from, again, the ignorance that conflates my self-worth with my body and my value as an individual with my body and my sense of being a me, a truly existing me with my body. They all come from this ignorance. Holding on to this body as mine, right? I was once at a teaching with Dalai Lama in New York, and it was a public talk. So the public talks, at least the ones he's given in the US, he gives they're really about like secular ethics, right? When he gives these big public talks. And it was the very beginning of the talk, and he was sitting on like a not a normal teaching throne, but like, you know, a big like a recliner, like a comfortable chair. So he was sitting in the middle of the stage. And all of a sudden he realized he didn't have his mala with me. And so he shouted to like one of his attendants who was off, and he goes, "Hey, bring me my mala." And then he's speaking in Tibetan, but he had the microphone on. And then he looked and he started laughing. And he goes, "Did you hear me?"
I just said, bring me my mala. And he thought it was like the most hilarious, and he's laughing. And the audience is like, what? I don't, it's so funny. I don't get it. For him, even just the fact that he had the mind to bring me my mala, this idea that I own it, there's this kind of attachment, this idea of me and mine. Such a type of self-grasping of the true essence of self, right? And so for him, just that brief moment was very amusing to him, my mala, and he just starts laughing. And why is that funny? I grasp this body as if it's mine. And because of that, I protect it and guard it and nourish it, give it the nicest of foods, the nicest of silk clothes, things like this. If you don't think of this body as a thing that belongs to you, if you think of it as merely a vessel you're using to allow you to practice Dharma, then you don't become attached to it. Okay? And again, we live in the world. It's okay to have nice things. It's okay to say, I really like taking care of my body and I like doing this. That's okay. But when that becomes your focus, when that becomes your driving motivation, then you're missing the plot. So that's the important thing to remember. He goes into this really elaborate, how to mentally take apart your body, like do an autopsy. And say, what is, when you take away the flesh, and then you take away all the muscle, and even you take the bones apart, what is there valuable in your body, right? There's nothing the Buddhists have a very kind of, the Tibetans and the Indians, and the body is nothing but a vessel of filth. Like everything on the inside of the body is dirty and unpleasant. One of the antidotes for attachment is you picture a person who you have attachment towards, and then picture all the flesh having been peeled off their body, and all the disgusting excrement and fluids and grossness that's inside of them. And you say, what am I attached to? Am I just attached to their skin? Is it just their skin alone that makes them beautiful to me, right? And that's how you realize your attachment is such a superimposition of your mind, right? Because all we are made up of disgusting things. Yet somehow we find attachment to them. And so here he's saying, don't just do that for others. Look at your own body and say, what is there an essence to my body? Is there something about my body that's so important that I need to, feed my attachment and my ego? So he is making an exaggeration here, right? Again, I don't want to say that we should abuse our bodies. Buddhism says we shouldn't, right? We have to find a middle way. The Buddha gave up the life of only eating 1 grain of rice a day. He said that mortifying my body in this way wasn't bringing me closer to liberation from samsara, right? So we need to take care of our body, but the same way we take care of a boat. We want this boat to bring us to the far shore of enlightenment. We have to make sure it doesn't have any holes, that it's seaworthy, that we have the oars, that we have all the parts we need, right? That's what it means. There are a couple of food offering verses, especially by Nagarjuna, where he specifically is saying, the only purpose of me eating this food is to make sure my body can run and be useful for serving the Dharma. And so when he blesses, the food blessing verses that come from Nagarjuna are all based not on may this food be offered to all the Buddhas and all this. It's saying, may I realize this food is just like medicine that is letting me live in the sickness that is samsara, and is letting me live a little longer to practice Dharma. And so we can think of our body in that way. Though there isn't much more to say. These verses I think are pretty clear, a little bit stronger. I like the idea that, I should at least protect my body so that eventually when I die, it can feed the jackals and the birds. At least I'll be of some use then. But otherwise, what use is my body? And that's true. That's a hyperbole, but it's true, right? Right now, my body is only useful if I'm using it to practice. But at least if I die, it could feed other sentient beings. Well, no, that's not being extreme. It's true in that sense, right? My body, I can't eat my own body. If I'm hungry, I can't eat the flesh of my body and be fulfilled. But other beings can, But it's not saying that I should give up my body now to do that, right? It's just recognizing that our body, what function does it serve? The Zoroastrians give it to the vultures, but traditionally in India and in Tibet they do the same thing. In India and Tibet, you yeah. That's actually a big issue right now because the vulture population has been dying, but because of antibiotics that we're giving to cattle, very strange. But many cultures do, right? That they use. In Tibetan Buddhism, we have what's called sky burials, which is leaving the body on top of the mountain to be eaten by the birds. And then I was talking to the Tupu who lives with one of the Tulkus who lives in the house. And common in where he's from, in Tawang even, they would cut up the bodies of the dead and put them in the river, so the fish and the other beings there can eat it. And he said it's common to cut the body into 108 pieces to then throw it in the river. And I said, who is doing that work? Like, that is a lot of pieces. And he's like, yeah, there are like select people who like that's their
I
job.
think that they asked the Muslims instead that because like considered non-virtuous for the Buddhists, so that's like a symbiosis between Islam and
In Tibet, there's some like that. In Tawang, there aren't any Muslims, so it's Mumpas that are doing it. They're very skilled and finding out how there can be 108 pieces to render a body into. Because 108 is this auspicious number. And I'm wondering who's counting. I don't know. But anyway, the point is that this is a tradition that many people say is that, okay, when this body is no longer serving me because I passed away from this life, my mind has continued on, my body at least can still fulfill some function. And even now in the West, there's one type of people use what's called green burials, where they take their body and turn it into compost to use to grow things, you know what I mean? Which is another option. Anyway. The point here is that what Shantideva is reminding us, this chapter is about watching our mind, right? Guarding our minds. And so much of our activities are focused on the attachment to our body. And that attachment comes from ultimately having a sense of self, a sense of I, and a sense of mind that are associated with our body. So if we can get rid of that sense of I and mind, and we loosen the attachment to our body, then we can recognize our body is the perfect vessel to practice Dharma. A perfect human rebirth is the perfect and most supreme way to practice Dharma. So we can appreciate that we have this human body, and we can do the things we need to take care of it so it can serve us to practice Dharma. And anything we do for our body that is not designed to encourage the practice of Dharma is probably unnecessary. So we need to try to find that balance. So we should maintain a healthy diet, be healthy, exercise, do all these things, but only so our body can be strong enough to practice. That's why we should do it. Not because we want to be models of magazine covers. Let's see. Let's try to do a few more verses. Okay, yeah, we can do a tea break now. It's 11:40, maybe a 10-minute break. And then we will come back and do a little more verses and a short meditation and then a Q&A. How's that sound? Okay, great. So yeah, 10-minute break. I would love some coffee. Thank you.
And you could just
So welcome back. Hopefully our minds aren't too distracted by our tea break. I'll get to the question in a moment. But so we have a little bit of time left today, right? We have about a half hour. I'd like to do a meditation. I'd also like to go through this next section. And the reason is next Sunday was supposed to be Geshe Domlur was supposed to come and teach. He has to go to West Bengal to his teacher's monastery because the Dalai Lama is going to give a teaching there and his teacher requested him to come. So he's not able to be here on Sunday morning. And we'd like to arrange to still have something happen here, whether it be a study group or a meditation session, but none of us from Sarah are able to come. So that means there's only one more formal class in this chapter. So I'd like to kind of go through a lot of the verses today. And the next class will be the end of this month. And I'm also leading that class. I don't want to have 100 verses to go through in the last class and be too much of a rush. So we'll go through a little more today, and that way you have more to think about before we go to the last class. So that's the plan. It may be a little bit of a rush, but that's okay. The nice thing of this chapter is it's not too complicated. So it's pretty easy to understand. So that's just the plan for our next half hour. The question that was just asked is in verse 55. It says, have a sense of shame, be apprehensive and peaceful. So in general, in Tibetan Buddhism, there are two virtuous qualities. One is shame and one is embarrassed. And the distinction between shame and embarrassment is that they're not similar to what we think of in the West as guilt, right? They don't have to do with feeling guilty, but having shame is feeling having a sense of regret when you engage in negative actions in private. And embarrassment is having a sense of regret when you engage in negative actions in public or in the view of other people. And so both of those are virtues, because when you recognize your own negative actions, feeling regret towards them is virtuous, and it encourages you not to continue engaging in those negative actions. So when we say a sense of shame, it's like, if you're by yourself in your room and you do something that is non-virtuous and you say, oh, you realize it's non-virtuous and you develop regret, and that helps purify the negative action, and it helps encourage you not to do it in the future. But the difference is that it's not saying I'm such a bad person because I engage in this negative action. So here, shame and embarrassment are virtues, but they're not the same as guilt. So we don't define ourselves by our negative actions, and we don't allow ourselves to become obsessed with them in such a way that we think poorly of ourselves. So we don't carry them with us. But we recognize engaging in non-virtue obviously is harmful to ourselves and to others when it's not part of the spiritual path. So shame and embarrassment, sometimes called conscientiousness, are two ways to help prevent us from engaging in non-virtue. So that's what it means here. Regret is one of the mental factors that's changeable. So if you regret isn't always virtuous. So when you regret having engaged in negative action, then it becomes a virtuous mind. And when you regret having engaged in a virtuous action, that's a negative one. So just because you feel bad about doing something, or you have regret, doesn't mean it's a good thing, right? If you regret coming to the center this morning because you wasted your whole morning, then, maybe that's virtuous. I don't know. That depends on how the teaching is, but I'm just joking. You know what I mean? There's a difference, right? So here, shame and embarrassment have to do with developing regret towards negative actions that you've done either in private or in public. But they're not the same as guilt or beating yourself up about them. And the goal is to motivate you not to engage in those in the future. So as I said, this chapter, right, the divisions of this chapter are how all harm comes from the mind and how virtue comes from the mind and how to watch over the mind. And then how to use mindfulness and introspection to guard the mind. And then how to use mindfulness and introspection, not just to guard the mind, but to train the mind. How to use a mind training approach that adopts mindfulness and introspection. And that's the section we're on now. And in that section, there's 3 divisions: how to avoid negativity and how to gather virtue. And then how to work for the benefit of others. Those are the 3 sections. So we're in the middle section, how to gather virtue. And we just completed then why it's necessary to abandon the body, which is to say attachment to the body, right? The conflation of the body with ourself. So that's what we mean when we say to abandon the body. And so I'd like to just go through this next section to end the chapter of discipline of gathering virtue, or the section. So the verses from 71 to 83 are the section that's called how to become skilled in the way of behavior. So what that means is what it means to actually have introspection as one of the motivating factors in all of your activities, and how to become skillful in that. So that's the section we'll go through. We'll read through all these verses quickly, and then we'll have a little bit of discussion on them. A lot of them are somewhat self-explanatory. I'd like to leave at least 10 minutes for a meditation and then for Q&A. So we'll go through these verses quickly, but if you have questions, you can ask them or save them for next time. We'll figure it out. So starting with verse 71 through 83. Now, while there is a freedom to act, I should always present a smiling face and cease to frown and look angry. I should be a friend and counsel of the world. I should desist from inconsiderately and noisily moving around chairs and so forth, as well as from violently opening doors. I should always delight in humility. The stork, the cat, and the thief, by moving silently and carefully, accomplish what they desire to do. A bodhisattva too should always behave in this way. With respect, I should gratefully accept unsought after words that are a benefit, and that wisely advise and admonish me. At all times, I should be the pupil of everyone. I should say well said to those who speak Dharma well, and if I see someone doing good, I should praise them and be well pleased. I should discreetly talk about the good qualities of others, and repeat those that others recount. If my own good qualities are spoken about, I should just know and be aware that I have them. All deeds of others are the source of joy that would be rare even if it could be bought with money. Therefore, I should be happy in finding this joy in the good things that are done by others. Through doing this, I shall suffer no losses in this life, and in future lives shall find great happiness. But the fault of disliking their good qualities will make me unhappy and miserable, and in future lives I shall find great suffering. When talking, I should speak from my heart on what is relevant, making the meaning clear and the speech pleasing, and I should not speak out of desire or hatred, but in gentle tones and in moderation. When beholding someone with my eyes, thinking I shall fully awaken through depending upon this being, I should look at that person with love and an open heart, always being motivated by great aspiration or being motivated by the remedial forces. If I work in the fields of excellence, benefit, and misery, great virtues will come about. Endowed with wisdom and joy, I should undertake all that I intend to do. I need not depend upon anyone else in any actions that I undertake. The perfections, such as generosity, are progressively more exalted, but for a little morality, I should not forsake a great gift. Principally, I should consider what will be of most benefit to others. Okay, so this section is teaching is how to become skilled in the way of behaving. And what this leads to, the next section, is how to work for the benefit of others. But before we can work for the benefit of others, we actually have to look at how to be in the world in such a virtuous way. And so this starts right away by saying, now that I have freedom to act, I have a perfect human rebirth, I have a mind that is supple and is able to understand the nature of reality, I should always present a smiling face. You know, I should never have an angry or reproachful look, and I should be friend to everyone. A true and honest friend to all. And again, this is saying all of our actions of our body and speech need to be guided by the actions of our mind. So even the way we present ourselves to others should always be agreeable, because there's no benefit to being disagreeable. And what it comes down to later in the chapter, in these verses that we read, is being friendly to others and complimenting others, recognizing others' good qualities never cost us anything, right? It never harms us to be friendly to others and to celebrate others' good qualities, to rejoice in the virtue that others create. It never harms us in this life, and what it does do is create the seeds for benefit in future lives. When we become upset with others and we either enjoy mocking others or speaking poorly of others, or we are jealous of the good actions they do, that actually creates misery in this life. And so I will say, some of these verses are very strange. I like 72, that's saying I should, avoid moving around noisily, and I shouldn't open doors very loudly. And the commentary is saying there could be a teacher behind that door who's meditating and you disturb him, right? But I should always delight in humility. I think this line is one of the most important. Sometimes we think of these good characteristics such as humility, being humble, or being even-tempered. These are just, we don't think of them with the kind of praise that we really need to. Like humility is something to rejoice in. If I could live my life filled with humility, it would be so much more peaceful and beneficial. So I should delight in humility. I should delight in the opportunity to see others' good qualities and to see others who are better than me, and to recognize that I am doing my best even though I'm not perfect, and therefore delight in that. And the opportunity to be gentle around others, to not be forceful, to bring peace to others' mind. That's something I should delight in. We sometimes say we do it out of consideration of others like this, but it shouldn't be that simple. We should delight in it. We should find joy in being humble. We should find joy in these things. Because when you can create a sense of joy in your mind in these virtuous activities, they become natural. You don't have to think about them. And even something simple as this. It's a silly verse, but if someone were to walk in this door right now and finally open the door and walk in, right away we'd react in a certain way, right? Or if you're in your room by yourself, and even your friend, your family member, your spouse throws open the door and walks in, right away you have a reaction, right? Like you're startled, you're surprised, you're worried, you're concerned, maybe you're angry, depending on what that is. But if they open gently and walk in very quietly, you have a different reaction. And that seems like a very simple, silly thing, but it's our small actions that affect others. And all of our actions are guided by our mind. So why would I behave in such a way that can cause distress to others, even a small distress, if I don't have to? Sometimes it's unavoidable, right? Depending on the circumstances. But when I have the opportunity to not cause distress to others, why would I not rejoice in following that path? Even if it's something as silly as how I walk into a room, you know? So consideration for others' well-being, for their sense of mind, for their own peace and tranquility is something I should delight in. So if you see, you know, if we're here and it's a tea time or something, but someone is still sitting and trying to meditate or concentrate, and so we're in the library or the kitchen and we're trying to be quiet to not disturb them. You can either just be trying to be quiet, not to disturb them, or you could be rejoicing in their practice and helping create positive environment for them to practice. The action is the same, right? Not talking loudly and not making the commotion. But the mind is different. One is saying, I don't want to be a distraction. And the other is saying, I want to create positive conditions for other people to have virtue and to have peace. So we should always be striving, and we should find joy in living in such a way that we create the conditions for others to find happiness and peace. And so here he says in 73, if you look at these, the stork or the heron and the cat and the thief, they move silently and carefully. I will say neither Indian nor Tibetans seem to like cats very much. Every time I see an example of a cat, it's just about how they're duplicitous, you can't trust them, they are murderers, and you know, they always say I'm two-faced like a cat. That's how they always say, because cats look so sweet and then they just murder things. But here, that's what he's saying, right? Look at these two examples. The stork who's sitting in the water, waiting for the fish to swim to his mouth. The cat that's stalking its prey, right? Barely moving, close to the ground, and the thief who sneaks in and out of the house without being heard. They know what they want, and in order to achieve their ends, they're silent, they're careful, they're very, very aware of everyone, they're focused, right? And they don't make any mistakes. Otherwise, they wouldn't get what they want. So obviously, we're not saying we should adopt their ends, which are harmful, but we should recognize that their practice is skillful, right? They know what they want, and they're very focused and attentive to how they do it. So we should do the same thing, but when we seek out virtue. So the cat, when he, you know, if you see a cat stalking something, how slowly they move, right? And they just crawl inch by inch until it's the time to pounce, right? In the same way, if we see virtue, we have to be very conscientious of how we go about working towards that virtue, not being distracted by shiny, flashy objects, unlike cats, who are very easily distracted by flashy objects. My cat, her seems to be her favorite toy these days. Literally, no matter whatever toys I would buy for her, she likes a piece of paper that I crumple into a ball and throw across the room. That is her favorite toy. That's all she wants. And she picks it up.
Easy.
It is easy. It is easy. I've also, I crochet some little mice for her. She likes to walk around with those in her mouth. And they just make really weird noises. But, you know, they're very focused. So this is saying we should be like that. We should adopt that mindset. And then again, if you've ever studied Lojong teachings, 74 is very much referencing those. When people criticize us or give us advice, even if we don't ask for it, we shouldn't close ourselves off just because people are giving us advice that we haven't asked for, because there can be benefit, you know? So my place, when I give advice to someone, I only try to give advice when it's asked for, right? It's not my goal to just be telling people how they should be anymore, because that's usually not well received, right? But when I receive advice, even when I don't ask for advice, it doesn't mean it's not useful. So when someone criticizes me, there might be something in there that actually can benefit me. So just because I'm not asking for it, doesn't mean I should shut it off. So what this is saying is, if we really are practicing humility, we're trying to train our mind to always be focused inward, to make sure it's not engaging in any of the harmful activities that create non-virtue. When someone criticizes us or gives advice or admonishes us, we should say there may be some validity to what they're saying. And so we shouldn't reject it just because we didn't ask for it. Now, maybe what they said is totally useless and it's their own projection of their mind. And if that's the case, okay. But first, don't reject it out of hand. Just consider it first. Think about it. They said, oh, you speak too fast when you teach and people can't understand you. Someone criticizes me without asking me that. My first instinct would be like, I know what I'm doing. Don't criticize how I do. Right? That's not useful. They said, maybe I do. You know, many people I'm speaking to, English isn't their first language, and it is for me. So maybe I do need to slow down the way I speak. Maybe I do need to change how I talk, right? But so if my first mind is to protect myself, to say, I didn't ask for your advice, therefore I'm right, you're wrong, I'm immediately cutting off the opportunity to grow, become a better person. So this is saying, when people criticize you, even though you haven't asked for it, accept it as a teaching. Say, I can be a student to the whole world. There's places I can learn how to improve my mind in any circumstance. And when I see other people who engage in virtue, I should celebrate that virtue. Even and especially for people I don't like. There are people who, for whatever reason, I get frustrated by, or I have they agitate me. If I see them engaging in virtue, or I see them receiving compliments, I should rejoice in them. I should compliment them. Anytime someone engages in virtue, it should be a source of joy, no matter who it is. That's the important thing. And so even in people who we might be frustrated with, we see they have good qualities. And so instead of criticizing them, we should rejoice in their good qualities and share their good qualities with others. That's what's most beneficial. And as he says, it doesn't hurt me to do this. I receive no harm in this life by saying this other person is good at doing something. Or when this other person receives, a reward or accomplishment or an achievement, for me to rejoice in that, I don't receive any harm in this life. So why would I not do it? Why would I cut myself off from that opportunity to practice virtue? Just because I have a petty, understanding or relationship with that person. And he does say, be careful. Sometimes flattering others can create an ego. So depending on who it is, maybe you don't tell them of their good qualities, but tell others of their good qualities, depending on the person. That's one way. Just be careful. You don't want to feed someone's ego, but you still want to celebrate their good qualities. And then when other people are celebrating your good qualities, here he translated it as saying, I should just know and be aware that I have them. But what most translations say, this is very, so if you compliment me on a good quality I have, what I should do is I should rejoice in how perceptive you are in noticing my good qualities, which seems a little silly, right? But still, it's something to rejoice in. To say, oh, when there's virtuous behavior, you notice that and you compliment that. So that's what I should be focused on. Not on how good I feel that you complimented me, but the fact that you're able to notice virtue or perceive virtue and compliment it, praise it, share it. That's what I should focus on. So again, you're never letting your ego be the center of your attention. Okay? You're always looking outward and saying, how can I support others? When they criticize me, what can I learn from that criticism? Even if I didn't ask for it. And when they practice virtue or they receive rewards or accolades, even if they're things that I deserve, I can still be happy for them. I can still find joy in their joy, and I can rejoice in that. The important thing is that everything I do, I'm doing it out of a wish to serve others. I'm doing it in such a way that my priority is that others find happiness in this life and all future lives, that the suffering of other sentient beings can be eliminated. And so I recognize that by guiding my action in such a way, I don't create harm to myself in this life. I don't take anything away, but I create positive seeds that can grow into beneficial qualities in the future. So introspection, as taught in this chapter, and how to live a life in accord your behavior in introspection is saying, all of your actions of body and speech need to be guided by your mind. And your mind has to be tamed and has to be a mind that rejoices in humility and is on the lookout for all of the sources of misbehavior, such as anger, attachment, jealousy, such as a wish to criticize others. The list of 27 we discussed earlier. So the mind is always seeking those things and is reacting to them with remedies. And it's also laying the groundwork where virtue can grow and flourish at the same time. So that's what it means to practice introspection. So what I'd like to do is take a brief moment to do a quick meditation. We don't have a lot of time, so we'll be very quick. And then we'll have a little bit of time for Q&A at the end. So let's take a moment to be comfortable in our seats. Let yourself adopt a position that's comfortable, whether it's the traditional posture or a different one, that allows you to have a strong support and your breath can flow naturally. letting your feet either be crossed under you if you're sitting or flat on the ground. Your hands resting comfortably in your lap or on your thighs. Your eyes staying half open, but not fixed on anything, just gazing to the space in front of you. And we'll just take a few moments to follow our breath, to allow our minds to calm down, allow our minds to focus. Even though there may be external distractions, we'll take a minute, allowing our mind to turn inward and adopt a strength of mindfulness. Just follow the in-breath, the out-breath, keeping that as your object for a minute. In the earlier section of our texts we explored today, it said whenever I notice any of these 27 sources of mistaken conduct, instead of indulging them, I should remain like a log, a piece of wood. So with that in mind, I want you to bring to mind a moment in your life recently, over the last week or today or something, where your mind was wild or uncontrolled or distracted, and yet you acted from a distracted moment. Instead of allowing yourself to act with a mind of intention, you acted out of a mind of distraction. And think of what consequences that might have. So take a moment to bring that incident to mind and think, because I was distracted, I acted in such a way, and these were the negative consequences that I experienced. It could be negative consequences of speaking inappropriately to others, or harming someone in some way, or more subtle, but just a moment when you acted out of distraction. And now think, in that moment of distraction, if I had adopted a mind of introspection and I recognized I was distracted, I could have remained like a log and not acted. What could have been different? What results could have been changed if in that moment I had chosen not to act? So now that we've identified the action and seen the negative consequence, bring to mind what would have been the results if I had chosen to remain like a log and not act out of a distracted mind. It may have been a beneficial response instead of a negative one, or it may just be a neutral response instead of a negative one. How could the situation have been changed if I had taken a moment to become aware of my distracted mind? And if I refused to act out of distraction? Now, having brought to mind an incident when you acted out of distraction, recognized the negative results and contemplated the potential positive results from refusing to act from a space of distraction. Now commit yourself. From here on in the future, I will strive to practice the introspection that looks at my mind. And when I notice my mind is distracted, I will remain like a log and not act from a place of distraction. I will adopt a mind of introspection that is always on the lookout when my mind has become distracted or wild. And when it sees that, immediately it will stop reacting. And it'll allow me to calm my mind and act with intention. Firmly commit yourself to this practice. I will do this. I will develop this mode. And now when you're ready, return your awareness to the room. So it was very, very brief. I know I'm looking at a clock, and so I had a rush. But you can see with all 27 things that we listed, you can do a similar meditation. Or with the 8 worldly minds, right? The 8 worldly dharmas. Go through an action or an opportunity, an experience in your life where you acted out of a worldly mind, one of these 27 sources. And see, it didn't bring you benefit because they never bring us benefit. It might feel nice in the moment, right? There might be some temporary worldly experience of benefit, but it's never real benefit. So if we can actually see experiences that aren't just conceptual, but we know when I saw I had a mind of anger and I acted out of it, and these were the negative consequences. What would have happened if I had stopped myself before acting that way? And I had just taken a moment to breathe and taken a moment to see the fire of my anger in my mind and to calm it down, and then act. How would that have changed the outcome? So we can go through all these negative minds, and by doing that, what you do is you, as we talked earlier about faith, right? This faith, not blind faith in divinity, but faith that this path, the spiritual path, leads to happiness. How do we develop that faith? By analyzing. I can see the times when my anger caused me difficulties, caused me suffering. And therefore, I can develop conviction that recognizing my anger and stopping it before it has a chance to control my actions brings benefit. That's where that conviction comes from. And so then once you have that conviction, then it becomes much easier to try to practice that all the time. So it's a very simple meditation. You can go through all the 27 things listed earlier here, or just through the 8 worldly dharmas, or even just through attachment and anger, or whatever kind of harmful emotion you're experiencing. Any of these. Introspection is the one, is a mind that analyzes itself. So introspection is one of the minds that actually is peering at the mind itself, right? Most of our minds are peering outward. Their objects are outside of it, ourselves. But introspection is a mind whose object is the mind itself, always looking inward. And the benefit of it is that as we strengthen it, we don't have to think about it. As we strengthen that muscle, it becomes second nature. When I see that anger arising, then I stop it and don't act out of it. When I realize I'm acting because I just want people to compliment me, I stop and act differently. And sometimes, depending on our circumstances, we may not be able to have a whole lot of different options. Like if you're, if you work and you're in a team, and you might have to take charge of a team and be the team leader and tell people what to do. But if you're doing that because you want them to see what a good leader you are and for them to compliment your skills, or if you're doing that because you want to have an effective team that produces a good product, your actions may be the same, but the mind is different, right? And so it's a good opportunity. This meditation is very simple, but it lets us really develop introspection. And so with that, maybe if you have any questions, anything that was brought up or not brought up. Mm.
Personally, I find have that joy. I mean, I'm happy or satisfied,
Mm.
but there is no joy.
Yeah, so there's frequently had the idea of finding joy in virtue and joy in humility, and it's not natural for us, right? That's the reason, especially in others' virtue. That's not our natural way of thinking, which is why we need to try to develop it. So we can think of what a joyful mind, the experience of a joyful mind is. And this goes down with the act of rejoicing, right? Especially our teachers like Kevin Rinpoche has repeatedly said how important rejoicing is. And what rejoicing is having joy in virtue, right? In our own virtue and others' virtue. And so it's not natural to us. It's not natural because we're living in samsara, we're suffering beings. But so what we need to do is at first it's a forced joy. It's not going to be natural. It's going to feel uncomfortable almost, like an uncomfortable joy, a difficult joy. Yeah, of course it does, because we're not used to it. But the more we practice it, it stops seeming big, you know? And that sounds like a platitude, but it's true. The more you say, okay, this is a situation, I should be joyful. I'm gonna at least try to have joy. Okay, I'm happy. I really know. Good for them. Good for that person. Good, especially when there's someone you don't like that gets something and it's something you deserve, maybe. And then you're like, oh, no, it's good. It's good. Really, it's good. Right? It seems totally fake. But that's how it's gonna start. It's gonna start that way. And it becomes natural. And that's okay. It's okay for it not to feel natural. We've been living in samsara since the beginning of this time doing things wrong. So it takes a lot of energy to stop that ship and to turn it around, right? But so if you remind yourself, every instance of virtue is an opportunity for joy. What does that joy feel like? What does happiness feel like to you? What does it mean to feel happiness? To feel joy? What does that actually mean? When there's something you find joy in, what is that experience? And how can you cultivate that when you see others being happy? So it's quite important. And at first, for most of us, it's going to be fabricated, very fabricated. And that's okay. But it's still very worthwhile. Because the benefit of it, the real benefit in having joy and humility and joy and virtue is it makes you want to do it more, right? Once you're doing something and you get joy out of it. So a good analogy, I don't know if any of you are runners, and I clearly am not a runner. But if you ever talk to anyone who runs and they've gone from not running to being a runner, in the beginning it's awful and they hate it. And they're like, I force myself every day to run for an hour every morning and I hate it and it's miserable and I want to die. But then they do it for a month or 2 months and all of a sudden they love it. And and also whatever, there's physiological reactions and more endorphins are released and blah, blah, blah. But a big part of it is they started to enjoy this thing that at first was really difficult and they hated. But by doing it over and over again, because they say there's some benefit in this, I know there's benefit, I don't see the benefit now, but I know there is. I'm going to commit myself to doing it. I have friends that went from not running at all to like literally every day taking 2 hours out of their day to run every day. Now, whether that's a great use of their time, I don't know, then going to run marathons and things like this. And they find great joy in it. And they're like, running a marathon isn't easy on your body, right? Like it's not fun, right? But they have so much joy in it because they've done it over and over and over again. But in the beginning, it was awful. And so in the same way, having joy in virtue is difficult because we're not used to it, especially others' virtue. And when we have joy in our own virtue, it can feel like very self-congratulatory, right? Which we're not supposed to do. So it seems also contradictory, which is why I mentioned earlier, it's okay to be proud of things you do that are virtuous, that are good. Or when you're skilled in something and you know that you're skilled in it, it's okay to have pride in your work or your skills. The difference is not identifying yourself as that is what you are, So it's okay for it to feel fake. It's okay for it to feel fabricated, but it's still important to try to cultivate. Yeah. Anything else?
Question, yes.
Yeah.
When you talk about emptiness, form and forms emptiness, and you say that that's the basis of like the foundation in some sense. I get it some way, probably saying we should be okay with ambiguity, not having, not being attached to things, but is there a deeper reason for understanding emptiness or?
Yeah, so we don't, understanding emptiness is not simply so we can get rid of our attachment. That's not that. Or the attachment things. Emptiness, the idea that nothing exists inherently. The reason it's important to understand is that literally all of our negative minds come from this fundamental ignorance that mistakes things as truly existing when they don't. It's not just our simple attachment or our kind of a very gross attachment or anger. All of our negative minds come from this. So we say that we have two obscurations, the obscurations to liberation and the obscurations to omniscience. And the obscurations to omniscience, what stops us from becoming Buddhas, at their coarsest level, at the most subtle level, are simply the dualistic appearance of phenomena to our learning, right? So the fact that we, when I see this, when my sense consciousness sees this book, it sees this book as if it were truly existing in its own. That mere duality, that dualistic mind, is preventing me from becoming Buddha. And that all comes down to this fundamental ignorance that doesn't understand the nature of reality. So the purpose of studying emptiness isn't simply to get rid of our coarse attachment to things. So that is an immediate benefit for those of us that are just starting. But ultimately, the only antidote to our delusions is an understanding of emptiness. That's the only antidote that will stop us from being under the control of karma and delusion, allowing us to choose how we engage in rebirth, and allowing us to actually become Buddhas to benefit others, be free from samsara. So the immediate reason, you have to kind of say, well, what is the immediate reason of practicing this now, and what's the long-term reason? So we often say when you're studying Lamrim, you have to adopt different attitudes. One attitude is the attitude of long view, that recognizing that no matter what I practice now, the benefit I have now is not going to be nearly the same as the benefit in the big picture. So my goal should always be the long view, or the big picture, recognizing that it may be hard in the short view. We have to have an extensive view that says there's lots of different things to study. It's not quick, it's not easy. There are lots of moving parts. So it's okay that it's hard for me to grasp all of it because it's new. But so that's why the long view and the extensive view work together. And they're combined with the relaxed view. So even though I know there's many different things I have to learn, and they're difficult, and even though I know that I may not see benefit right now, but I have to take a big picture looking at Buddhahood, I have to do it in a relaxed way. That's not desperately clinging to things as being life or death every moment, because then I'll get burned out and not be able to actually practice. So you have to balance these three of recognizing an extensive view, a long view, and a relaxed view. And we use those to approach our study of topics, especially like topics of emptiness, that are so difficult. Because then, only by combining these different attitudes, can we then actually adopt a healthy way of trying to study emptiness and see how it impacts our life right now, how it makes it easier for us to get rid of coarse attachment and anger, and then how it also can serve as an antidote to more subtle types of attachment, anger, and other things moving forward. So it has to be multiple levels at once. Yeah.
You see lots of I should rule like a piece of it, right? So what is this piece of it as enlightenment by shouldn't be a strong I shall go away.
Same. The idea that being a piece of wood doesn't symbolize anything special as opposed to being a stone or something. It's just recognizing that when I notice that my minds are actually one of these non-virtuous or the sources of bad behavior or negative behavior, I should cease my activity. Like a piece of wood, like a log lying on the ground, or like a stone, or like any of these things. Any of these could be appropriate metaphors. So he just chooses the piece of wood. But there's no special significance to it. Yeah, well, so yeah, depending on the circumstances, there's many different things we can do. But what he's saying is that, the meditation we did is when I find myself with a distracted mind, how often am I distracted? I'm distracted all the time. I'm trying to do a dozen things at once, all the time, right? And so often I'm acting out of distracted, and I don't even realize it. But what introspection would do is it would notice, hey, your mind is going in 3 directions at once. So just stop. Just take a moment to stop. like a log, like a rock, like a stone. Just stop what you're doing and don't let the distracted mind be what's telling you what to do. And then analyze, what am I trying to do? What's the best way to do it? You know, like for instance, it doesn't matter. It's not a good example, but yeah, it may be I have to pull myself out of the situation. It may be I have to go do something else. It may not be anything.
Keep quiet, don't say anything.
Yeah, it just depends.
Count to 10.
Exactly. So it depends on the circumstances. This is just like an analogy, but it's saying that when you notice there's a mind of anger, attachment, or confusion, or any of these 27, when I notice that like I really just want someone to praise me, and that's why I'm acting, just take a moment, count to 10, take a deep breath. And if you need to walk out of the situation, do that. If you can't do that, then just say, okay, how am I going to behave where I'm not motivated by a harmful mind? So a stone is also a good example, but here he just uses a log. Yeah.
Sometimes hostile forces can attack a person, provoke anger, so they can laugh at you and say, "Oh, you say you're non-violent, family, this, that." So the sense of dark, hostile, like the story of the villain. So when hostile forces attack us, and we are becoming hostile against them, against maybe our normal nature, how do I overcome anger, bitterness, sorrow? It's a problem. It's a new problem. We've never had this before for years, maybe as a child.
Yeah. So it's true that many times people are actively trying to harm us, right? And they act out of anger. We can't control external circumstances. It's impossible. So whether people are harming us on purpose or on accident, we can't control them. But we can say, I can control how I respond. So when I respond with anger, does it benefit me in any way? And so it may be that they're trying to provoke anger, and if our minds are distracted or unhinged, that anger comes. So that happens. But then you say, okay, did that anger benefit me? Did it serve me? And when you realize, when you become very convinced that that anger didn't help me, all it did was harm me, right? When you can become convinced of that, then you can train your mind to not react. So you notice the external stimuli, whether it be a person or a situation, whether it be intentional or accidental, you notice it. And then you say, okay, I'm not going to be provoked by this because there's no benefit. And so one of the ways to not be provoked is to realize that that other person is suffering. The only reason they're acting this way is because they're suffering and they want to be happy. Just like all sentient beings, they want to be happy and they don't understand the distinction between what is happiness and what is suffering. They think that by being harmful to me will bring them happiness. So they're deluded. And so instead you develop compassion for them. So that's one of the primary ways. But it's a matter of practice. It doesn't happen. It's very easy to talk about. But anger and attachment are so strong that they overwhelm us. So that's how we have to practice in our meditation. And then hopefully it's easier to react in the future. Okay, so we've gone long. If there are any other questions, maybe one more. Otherwise.
Venerable, I've heard that some teachers say that even keeping one vow, ethical vow, is more powerful than making a lot of generosity, the Buddhas and Bodhisattvacharyavatara. Why is that? Refraining from, I don't know what kind of vows, like not lying or something.
Yeah.
More powerful than.
They often say that keeping even one vow perfectly pure creates more merit than all this like generosity and so forth. In many of the examples, they say, if you gave as many jewels as there were grains of sand in the river Ganges for 100 lifetimes, that's not as powerful as keeping this one vow, right? Like this perfectly pure. The reason is, the actual mathematics of merit, I'm not going to go into, right? Who knows? It's very variable. But all of our actions are preceded by actions of mind. Actions of body and speech are always preceded by an action, right? Which is why vows are so powerful, because vows are mental actions. So to keep a vow perfectly pure actually is then affecting all of your actions of body and speech. And it's affecting every moment. It's continuous in your mind stream. So when you're able to keep your vows and you keep them pure, they're always active. So they're always generating merit, right? And so having pure vows allows every moment of your existence to be one of continuous virtue, nonstop. So sometimes those examples that are taught are like exaggerations to show the importance of the vow, right? So I can't really say like what is more meritorious is a very extremely subtle phenomenon, right? So I can't actually say that you doing this versus that is better. Yeah. Oh, okay, so this one, sorry, verse 83, I didn't explain. This is a very weird translation. So what this is positing so here's this translation by the Pamukara translation, maybe is a little clearer. They say the perfections, giving and the rest, progress in sequence, growing in importance. The great should never be abandoned for the less, and others' good should be regarded as supreme. So what he's saying here is that in general, if you look at the 6 perfections, fully embodying the perfection of, so they go in order, right? There's generosity and then morality, and then ethical patience, and then vigilance, meditation, and wisdom, right? So of those 6, the power of, say, morality, the second one, is more powerful than generosity. So you shouldn't ever abandon morality to practice generosity. And in the same way, the power of patience is more powerful than the practice of morality in this way. So you should never abandon patience for the purpose of practicing morality. But the truth is that he's just showing that that ultimately the practice of the perfection of wisdom is the most important, right? But the truth is, as you practice all of them, they include the others. So it's kind of a false narrative to say, I'm going to abandon morality to practice patience, right? But what he's saying is if you have an instance where you're practicing patience, what's an example? There's a good example like so especially with morality, we talk about the vows, right? And so the example they always give, it was with there are 2 monks, I'm sure you've heard it, comparing the way of relating to the vows. As a monk, you're not supposed to be touch a woman and have contact with a woman. And so there's 2 monks who see a woman at the edge of a river and she can't cross because it's too powerful. And she asks for help. And one of the monks says, I'm sorry, I have a vow not to touch women, so I can't help you. And the other monk just picks her up and puts her over his shoulder and carries her across the river, puts her down. And then as they go on their way, the first monk says, what are you doing? I thought you broke your vow to help to touch that woman. And he goes, oh, her? You're still holding on to her? I put her down at the edge of the river. Right. But so the point in that is saying, yes, I may have this vow, but it's more important to help others. And so it's okay to say that small vow, I'm breaking it because I'm helping others and I'm benefiting others. And it's not saying that my vows don't matter, but it's saying that I recognize there's more benefit. I think in His Holiness, there's a commentary on this text by His Holiness that was published, I think also by Pamukara, and he uses the example of if you know someone is a murderer, then it's maybe okay to lie to them. If you see them chasing someone they're going to kill, and they ask where that person is, it's okay to lie to them. And actually, it's interesting because, yeah, Pavol Rinpoche actually says it isn't. Pavol Rinpoche says if in that circumstance, it's better not to respond at all, and just not say anything, because that lying is still non-virtue. And what His Holiness is saying, he says, you know what, that may be true. By lying, if you saw their victim running to the right and you say, oh, they ran to the left, and you're lying, you may be creating some non-virtue. But the benefit of serving others and preventing harm is more virtue than the non-virtue you create in lying. So you have to recognize that there's a balance there. So that's what that is getting to, is that ultimately the practice of wisdom is the most important. We said the 6 perfections gradually become more and more powerful, with the practice of generosity being the least and the practice of the perfection of wisdom being the most powerful. But you shouldn't cling so tightly to one to dismiss it for the other. But ultimately, when we talk about vows being important, it's because they're mental activities that pervade all of our actions. Okay, that's a good question. There's a lot of material, a lot of talking we can do about that. Unfortunately, I've gone quite over because I'm not good at the time. I don't want to keep you. So let's take a moment to recognize that by coming together today to trying to study the teachings of the Buddha by trying to live a spiritual life, to learn what it means to be a virtue in the world, what it means to have joy and humility. By doing this together today, we've created some merit. And instead of keeping that merit for ourselves, we want to dedicate that merit. We want to give it away to all sentient beings, so that all sentient beings might have the permanent bliss of Buddhahood, that may be free from all suffering, and that all of those who live in the world might have all their wishes fulfilled in accordance with Dharma, be free from all suffering, and attain the perfect complete bliss of Buddhahood. So all my merit, I dedicated it to that. And I dedicated also that I might become a Buddha, so that I might be of more benefit to other sentient beings. Not because I want the bliss of Buddhahood for myself, but because I want to help others. And I know that my progressing on the path of practice and enlightenment will allow me to help others in a more meaningful way. And therefore, I dedicate this merit toward the perfect, complete enlightenment of myself as well, so that I might be able to serve others more fully. And with that, we'll just recite on page 36, the dedication prayers and the long night prayer for His Holiness Dalai Lama. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha, and may I lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel Bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All powerful Chandreze Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. And then we'll do the prayer and the swift rebirth of Kyabje Lama's Rinpoche in the Potapati. Peerless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shavakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang father and sons, along with lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. Holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable, venerable Guru, to you I make this request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, which are the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and for all other living beings, you suddenly departed in peace. What a great loss. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth, the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels, and the great waves of bodhicitta, of the glory of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you. Yeah, so we have to figure out what's happening for next Sunday. So whether there's going to be a program here at the center or not, we're not 100% sure right now. None of the teachers are able to come. We would like there to still be a program and maybe like a guided meditation and a discussion group. So we can see if that's going to happen, and we will make sure everyone knows as soon as possible what is going to happen. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.